So hello, everybody, and welcome to the science portion of our Jamie York Academy open house. And the intention of these next 45 minutes is to talk a little bit about, introduce you perhaps to some of the ideas of what is central to our science program. And these are all of our science classes are 4-week main lessons, with the exception of being 5th grade is 1 week shorter with the botany course. And what you're seeing here are most of our science teachers that we have in the academy right now going forward into this next year. And we started our science courses the 2nd year of the academy. So we're now going into our 3rd year, and I think I have to edit that. I think actually we started we're going into our 3rd year of science, but we did have 2 years of the Math Academy before we started the science, and we're adding things slowly as we go. And to just say very briefly, we have a full physics curriculum from 6th grade all the way to 12th, and I'm very pleased and proud of being able to offer that. And we have a variety of other courses as well. But without further ado, I'd like to go forward and just have our science teachers here just very briefly introduce themselves. And if you could just say what you teach and perhaps just give a very slight picture of your background in science, perhaps what you studied in university. I'm going to call on Maria Cabeza first. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll be teaching 7th grade chemistry, 8th grade chemistry, 5th grade botany, and then next fall, not this fall, but next fall, I will be teaching 8th grade anatomy and physiology. My background or my education, I got a bachelor's of science in environmental engineering.
Thank you, Maria. And I'll call on Juan Pablo now. If you could just say, and you could also give a picture of everything that you teach in the academy as well, because he does quite an amazing variety of things. Go ahead, Juan Pablo.
Thank you, Jamie. So hi, everyone. I'm Juan Pablo. I'm from Guatemala. And I studied first civil engineering. So this year, this is going to be my 2nd year at the academy. And this year I'll be teaching physics, the physics main lessons in 6th grade and 7th grade, also astronomy in 6th grade and geology. Plus, after the civil engineering, I studied also to become a teacher and in social sciences and history. So I also humanities. This year I'm going to be teaching the Mayan civilization, ancient civilization, the Mayan world. Since I'm from Guatemala, that's a lot of what I studied while I was studying history. And I'm also going to be teaching the Age of Exploration. So that's for 7th and 8th grade. And for high school, it's ancient civilizations, the Mayan world. And for middle school, the Age of Exploration, 7th and 8th grade. And and the science main lessons that I mentioned before. I've been a Waldorf teacher for almost a decade now. And I was teaching back at our Waldorf school here in Guatemala that we founded the high school. That's actually how I met Jamie like 7 years ago, something like that. So yeah, and this is going to be my 2nd year at the academy.
And you teach Spanish.
And I teach Spanish also. Yeah.
This is the danger of teaching too many things. You kind of forget what you teach, but that's very good. Yeah, Juan Pablo is, I think you probably just got a little bit of a picture of that. He seems to be the ultimate Renaissance man and can teach just about anything. And that was really put to the test when we asked him to teach Spanish last year, and he hadn't taught directly. And of course, he was at a bilingual school where he was operating in both Spanish and English. But you know, to ask him to say, oh, you're now going to teach Spanish as a second language to our students. And he has done a spectacular job with that. Our families have been really thrilled with that. And so now he's returning in many ways to his roots of teaching science, which we're thrilled to have that. That's going to be an exciting thing. And so, Mr. Messner, if you could introduce yourself now.
Right. Thank you, Mr. York. So my degree is in cognitive science, which is all about learning, but minor in computer science. And I did that for a number of years working in research, much like Mr. York, until I discovered that I actually loved engaging in the learning process on both sides and decided to become a teacher. And I have a concentration in theatrical lighting design because I love light and I love ladders, actually. Anyhow, I am just like a comet that passes through the physics curriculum like once every 2 years. I teach one course. And so this is the year, thermal physics for grades 9 and 10. I had the privilege of teaching it in Shining Mountain for many years. I love the material and I'm looking forward to bringing it again. Thank you.
And so I'll thank you, all of you. It's an exciting group that we have as science teachers here. And again, these are all of our science classes are 4-week main lessons. If you're not familiar with the term main lesson, it's basically an intensive block for 4 weeks where the students are really engaged in that material pretty deeply. I'd say a good 3 hours a day. That's like the central focus of their academics during that period of time. And these are fabulous courses. And you may want to know, how does this really work? So I thought I would give you a little bit of picture about how I've been doing that. And again, as the sort of founder of this academy, we've been focused on math in the beginning, but I've had a love of science for a long time myself. And I have a degree in computer science back in the day when they weren't quite sure, what do we do with these computer programmer types and whatnot? They weren't quite sure what that was. It was a long time ago, you can imagine. And what they did is they stuck you in the math department, and you were required to take all sorts of science classes as well. And so I certainly took chemistry and physics, and in particular I loved physics. And that's sort of my focus in the Science Academy. I teach 8th grade physics, and I also teach physics in 10th, 11th grade that we refer to as mechanics. And I also teach astronomy, which is a fabulous course in grades 11 and 12. And so I would say, again, quite surprisingly, it's amazing how we can actually engage the students in the teaching of science in a way that really works out. And so we do have, through this means, a variety of different ways of engaging the students in the learning of science. And I'm actually going to prompt a couple of our teachers with some questions here. And I'm going to ask first Maria, how is it that you feel that you can engage students? I mean, you've been teaching in this via Zoom and online learning for all this time, and you're going to now be starting the teaching of science. How is it that you think that you'll be able to engage your students so that they can get excited about science? How are you going to do that as a teacher?
Yeah, so the science courses, they have a lot of different aspects, right? So that we have the recorded lectures. In the recorded lectures, we will be doing demos, like science experiments. We also send out physical kits to each individual student. So then the daily assignments will be very hands-on for them. They will do these science experiments at home with their families. And then the next day, or 4 times a week, we meet in person. So I meet with the students in person. That's where I engage in conversation with them. We talk about what we've observed. And that's where I really try to build have the students interact with each other and also with me. And then also on Fridays, the students meet on their own in work groups, and they also do some work together like that. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of different aspects, and because we just try to make it as well-rounded as possible. So,
and I'll add also, that Maria was a student at the Shining Mountain Waldorf School. She's a graduate from there, graduated in 2008 and experienced all this Waldorf education. It's funny, as a Waldorf graduate, you could tend to think that, oh, this is the way people normally learn. But I would say that Waldorf science is not the typical way that people experience science. It's not easy. Being a Waldorf science teacher is not the easy path. It's not the easy way to teach science, but I would say it's very powerful. And yes, I will say in many ways it's superior to the science that I experienced as a student, as much as I did love science. And so I'm going to pose this question perhaps to Mr. Mester and Juan Pablo. How is it that you think that Waldorf science is different than what the typical science teaching in our world is? Could either of you give your thoughts on that question?
Okay, I'll go ahead. So there are a lot of different things that are different from the mainstream science curriculum, and I think one of the things that I always like to make a little emphasis on it is that when you're studying science in a regular school, in a traditional curriculum, normally you're studying history of science. You're just learning who discovered what and in what time, and and maybe you do some equations about it, maybe, but that's it. You're just learning a little bit about the history of science. Actually, when we look at the Waldorf approach to science, we are trying to get the students actually discover things by themselves, so it's a lot of observation, a lot of analysis and thinking and getting to their own conclusions and being real scientists. Not just learning everything that it's on a textbook. And I'm not against books, those are where most of the humanities knowledge is gathered, but the textbook, that it's kind of like, this is the truth and you need to learn everything that it's in this textbook, is really a non-scientific approach to science, right? So actually, just as Maria was saying, having them experience with the demos and the experiments and everything actually really help them. And before you teach them something, before you tell them what's, like, again, the truth that they need to learn, it's about planting the seed of curiosity on the students, for them to actually have this motivation to try to solve all the puzzles that they are observing.
Thank you, Juan Pablo. Yeah, the two words that you mentioned that I think are so critical and so important, which I have to say, I don't feel that I really experienced that in my own science courses in public school. And that is this idea, this focus on observation, careful observation, and this focus on discovery. I certainly learned a lot of stuff when I was a student in my science classes, but oftentimes those things were just given to me without a sense of discovery. Let me give a specific example. Some of you may know Archimedes' principle associated with physics and in the world of fluid mechanics, I guess it would be under that category. But Archimedes' principle says that if I take an object and put it in water, let's imagine a large rock, that after I put it in the water and we'll imagine that it sinks. If it does sink, it will become lighter in water by the weight of it will be reduced by the weight of the water that it displaces. So if I've got a rock that weighs normally 50 pounds and I put it in the water and displaced, pushed aside, however you want to think about that, if it happens to displace 20 pounds of water, it weighed 50 pounds out of water, 20 pounds were displaced. So now it's going to weigh 30 pounds in water. So that's Archimedes' principle. I wasn't very articulate in saying that, but that's the idea. And I think the way that it normally happens is the students are given that principle, and then maybe they do an experiment or something that demonstrates that that principle is true. And instead, what we try to have our students do, what I did, and this is what I do in my 8th grade physics course, is I have them actually do the experiment for themselves, observe what they're seeing, take measurements, and then in class, I'm trying as a teacher, hopefully successfully, to guide them through this process of discovery where they can come to the realization of what the law really is. And that's this idea, this focus. The term is phenomenological, and try spelling that one. Phenomenological science is really this focus on careful observation. Then out of that, the students are led through a process of discovery where they can then come to what as a group, and that's part of the social aspect of these live every day. They're meeting live for, say between 45 minutes and an hour. And then to really discover that together as a group is a very powerful experience that I think can really get students excited about science. And I was going to call on Mr. Messner. Perhaps he could add to anything that we've just said, and also just to say what's special about this thermal physics course, because to me, I think there is something special about the way you teach that. I've been quite familiar with that, and I think it's a great example. I don't know if you're reading my mind properly, but I'll ask you what you could say.
I'm not sure how I'm reading your mind through the entire mass of the earth there, Mr. York, on the other side of the globe. But I will say a couple of things. One, you and Juan Pablo, it's a beautiful name. Sorry, I'm not a Spanish speaker, but it's lovely. Spoke very well. And if I would just taking it in as like, yes, in my head, I say, I agree. If I were to kind of try to reduce even more, I would say that we want our students to see the world that's in front of them for what it is, and then find the truth that's there, as opposed to seeing the ideas that someone told them was true and trying to find the world through that. It's a big difference. So thermal physics, I love it. I'll tell you something that this comes from the world of social psychology. It's a classic experiment. They have a participant holding, rating people, looking at list of qualities, what do you think of this person? Did you like them? Are they approachable? They give this participant, while they're working, either a hot coffee or an iced coffee. The lists are completely the same, exactly the same. And what they find is that if you're holding something warm, you judge the person you're reading about as warmer, more likable. If you're holding something cold, you judge them as being less approachable, less likable. That's how deeply our felt experience of warmth and cold influences our reality. And so we start with this physical felt experience and then see how that abstracts out into all the phenomena that surround us. And because we're doing it in 9th and 10th grade, we take those ideas, we see their lawfulness, and we bridge them over into equations. And we get to use them algebra. Algebra is great. So lots of demonstrations, lots of things to observe, experiments to perform, data to take, history to learn, just a lot going on. It's great stuff. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Messner. I guess you partially read my mind, but I'd say one of the wonderful things about thermal physics, and because Mr. Messner has the privileged position of teaching both algebra and thermal physics, it's a wonderful thing to see how we can apply the algebra, because algebra can be very abstract, but to be able to apply that to real world situations, I think it can be a very powerful thing. And again, that's what I'm doing right now, because I'm helping to teach astronomy in India right now to some of our Math Academy students. And here's all this math that we've learned. For example, trigonometry. How do we use that in this case in order to make a map? It's a very powerful experience to really see applied mathematics in a very deep way. Oftentimes, you remember some of these word problems that you may get in a textbook, and they tend to be frustrating for students. They also tend to be very superficial, and they intend to say, oh, this is an example about how mathematicians use math in the world. But to really do that for real, you need to slow down, take time, and go into depth. And that's what happens with the thermal physics, certainly, that Mr. Messner does. Okay, so I think that's enough of us talking for now. I'd like to field some of the questions maybe that are coming in. And Karen, could you read some of those questions. And again, if
Yeah.
anybody else has questions, please send them via chat. And anybody who happens to be listening to this recording, you can certainly reach out to us if you have further questions. Send us an email and I may get on to a Zoom meeting with you if that would be helpful. So go ahead, Karen.
So there is a question, let's see, it's if your child is registered in a science course and in the Math Academy at the same time. There's a question about how that works in terms of scheduling and the workload.
Yeah, back in the day, and I say that this is our going into our 5th year of the Academy, we began with math, but back in the day, it was pretty simple, right? We only had math. And so there was no such thing as a schedule conflict, right? We didn't have any students that were, for instance, taking 10th grade math and 8th grade math at the same time. We didn't have to worry about that. There were no schedule conflicts. Now we have science classes and we have humanities and we have Juan Pablo teaching Spanish and we've got all these things going on. And so, yeah, we've obviously had to carefully make sure that there are no scheduling conflicts. And I think we've done that fairly well. So yeah, that isn't, there aren't any conflicts with that. What does have to happen is if your student is taking Spanish and doing a science main lesson and doing the Math Academy, and now suddenly you're having to find a time to meet as a group, what needs to happen is you get together with the other families in that group and you have to figure out, okay, and of course, all these families have other activities going on. Sometimes finding a time to meet can be a little bit of a challenge. So some of our families meet at 2 in the morning. That was a bad joke, sorry. Yeah, you can find times to meet, hopefully that are that work for everybody. It's certainly one of the bigger challenges finding group meeting times, but we all make it work in the end. Another question, oh, Mr. Messner?
If I could just briefly add to that, the main lessons that are within the Math Academy are designed so that families could either go deep and spend hours on what's going on or put no more time into them than they would any other week of the Math Academy. That's kind of like the way they work. So when students take our physics or any of our science courses, or rather any of our main lessons that aren't, the math main lessons, then a lot depends on how much freedom they have in their schedule. As homeschool families, if you are following a rhythm of having these intensive main lessons throughout the year, then the science or humanities course can drop right into that. And if, on the other hand, if your student's schedule is filled up with stuff all the time and they can't expand, there are ways to be flexible. That's always, that's our key. You can have a full experience and document less. I try to, be clear about what's the most important things to put in the main lesson book, and lots of options, but you don't have to do all of them. And so it can work. It's all about flexibility and working with your individual situation.
Thank you, Mr. Messner. Is there another question, Karen?
Yeah, well, there was another question about transcripts, which I think in regards to science, which I think would be kind of the same, honestly, as with the Math Academy, or do you want to elaborate on any kind of science?
I can say a little bit about that. We did cover this transcript question also in the Math Academy portion of the open house. But we do give reports, official looking reports that have a course description, and there could be included with that, for instance, a course grade. And there's a narrative where we talk about, how the student did. We tend to do that in our course reports. And then it's, once again, you as the homeschool parent really has a more complete picture about how your child has done. So in terms of any sort of assessment or grade or anything like that, we really leave it up to you as the homeschool parent to really, if you feel the need for a grade, to really enter that. And I know some of our families are actually work through an organization that helps to create the transcripts for homeschool families. And so that is something that we work with families to make sure that works out well. We do give credit hours as part of that report that you see. And then, of course, families figure out how to actually include that if we're talking high school, how to include all that information when they apply for colleges. So that all does work out, I think, quite well. Is there another question, Karen?
Yeah, this is again actually about credit. And the question is, for a full high school credit in physics, Does the student take a physics block each year? If so, can the student begin that late, such as in 10th, 11th, or 12th grade, and take several physics blocks in 1 year?
Yeah, so I'd say in general that, I mean, this kind of relates to another question people often ask. Oh, if my student is in 8th grade and I want them, should they be taking the 8th grade physics, but they didn't do physics last year in 7th grade? What should they do? And I will say this, it's kind of an amazing thing in a way, the way the Waldorf science curriculum is designed, even though in many ways, perhaps subtly, we do build upon these experiences year after year. It's not like it's prerequisite knowledge to move on. So you can take Mr. Messner's thermal physics course without having done our middle school physics courses. You can take the 8th grade physics without having done 7th grade. And these are amazing experiences, but you can do one at a time. And I will say this, you know, when I took physics as a high school student, it was an experience pretty much, sure, we did some physics in middle school, et cetera, but especially when you got into high school, it was what you did in 12th grade, and it was solely in 12th grade. But what we do here is, and this is very typical of Waldorf programs, be it in an in-person school or not, that you take a 4-week intensive every year from 6th grade to 12th grade. So overall, you do get a full physics experience. And I hope that answers kind of that question there. And I do see another question here. Are we offering anatomy and physiology? I guess anatomy can have, especially if we're talking about middle school, it can really have 2 aspects to it. One is typically done in 7th grade, which is related to human sexuality and reproduction. And we really encourage parents to teach that in their own homeschool. I think that's appropriate because that can vary greatly depending upon your own values and beliefs. And then in 8th grade, it really focuses on the muscular and skeletal system, anatomy and physiology. And that is something that we do offer, but we're offering it 13 months from now. So that'd be September the following year. And that's something that Maria Cabeza will be teaching. And otherwise, any other questions, again, type it into the chat if you wish.
Mr. York, let me just also note, because I saw in the part of that question about high school courses, the high school physics courses, just to note, not all of them are offered every year. So starting in 10th grade for high school physics, that sequence, actually, that wouldn't be starting late. That would be starting right on time, because thermal physics is offered every other year for grades 9 or 10. And so there's a particular sequence or a recommended order to take them if you're doing that cycle through us, depending on whether your student enters high school in an odd year or an even year.
Yes, that's correct. So this year, if you have a 9th grader, they would take thermal physics. And if you have an 8th grader, they would take the thermal physics when they actually get to 10th grade. And it's the same thing with the mechanics course. I'm not offering it this current year, but I will offer to teach mechanics the following school year. So a student in 10th grade now would take it in 11th grade is how that would work. Any other questions that we might have? Okay, well, with that, again, I encourage anybody who's listening to the recording, if you have questions, please reach out to us. And, you know, there are a lot of questions, needless to say, on our website. A lot of questions can be answered by reading through our website and seeing what we have to offer there. So thank you, everyone, for showing up. And I wish you a very successful coming year, both with any of your science classes that your children might be teaching, in math and everything else that they might be doing. Thank you.